Pokemon card game skills in just 10 minutes! I'm not sure how this card works.
Is there something wrong?
Professor Pokecard!
Ren, if it's a Pokemon card problem you have, I can probably help.
Since you were the one who taught me how to play the game, I've done a good job collecting cards, but cards like stadiums or Pokemon tools are still a bit confusing to me. How do they work?
I see. Well, it sounds like it's time for you to learn more about rules and cards and get your Pokemon skills to the next level.
All right, I'm in.
Here are the 5 points we'll learn about today. For starters, let me explain stadium cards for you.
That would be great.
You can play only one stadium card during your turn, but it stays in play while the game goes on. A stadium card goes between both player sides of the field, and there can only be one in play at a time. Different stadium cards can have a bunch of interesting effects.
Like increasing my damage or letting me pull a Pokemon from my deck.
Not just you, actually. Both players can use the stadium in play, and that's what's special about them.
I see, so it works for both me and my opponent.
When a new stadium card is played, the previous one goes into the discard pile. By the way, you cannot play a stadium that has the same name as the one currently in play. That's an important detail.
I'm gonna write that down.
Next up, let me explain Pokemon tools.
I see Pokemon tools also offer a lot of different options.
A Pokemon tool can be attached to one of your Pokemon in play. Only one tool per Pokemon. For example, in this situation, Defiance Band makes Miraidon EX's attacks deal 30 more damage.
That's 250 damage to Koraidon EX with Miraidon EX's Photon Blaster. Amazing!
If you have 2 Pokemon in play and 2 tools in your hand, you can attach one tool to each Pokemon during the same turn if you want.
One per Pokemon, huh? And what if I want to give my Pokemon a different tool later on?
Unfortunately, once a tool is attached to a Pokemon, it stays there and can't be moved.
Okay, I see.
In other words, you can't attach 2 tools to a single Pokemon or freely switch tools around after they've been attached.
Oh, that makes sense.
All the more reason to carefully think about what tool to attach to which Pokemon to get the upper hand in battle. By the way, if your Pokemon gets knocked out, its Pokemon tool gets discarded as well.
Better write that down too.
And that's everything you need to know about Pokemon tools. Let's keep going. Next, I'll teach you about retreating, a great way to deny your opponent prize cards.
I guess that has to do with the retreat on the bottom right of Pokemon cards?
Good guess. I knew you were paying attention. Each Pokemon has a retreat cost, which is how much energy it will need in order to retreat.
Charmeleon says that it needs 2 energy to retreat.
Once per turn, you can pay your active Pokemon retreat cost by discarding that much energy from it and switch it with one of your benched Pokemon. Now, what if your active Pokemon is this Cyclizar?
Hey, wait! There's no energy next to the word retreat on this card.
Indeed. Some cards don't have any energy in their retreat cost. That means you can switch them with a benched Pokemon without discarding any energy.
But tell me, how exactly do you decide which benched Pokemon to switch into when retreating?
Good question. It's usually a good idea to send a Pokemon with high HP that will be hard to knock out, or a Pokemon you've been preparing on your bench that is now ready to dish out some strong attacks.
I get it now! By the way, what do I do if I don't have any Pokemon on my bench?
Well, in that case, your Pokemon can't retreat. On that note, if your active Pokémon gets knocked out while you don't have any bench Pokémon, you will be out of Pokémon and your opponent will win immediately, even if they still had prize cards to take.
Wow, I better make sure that I always have Pokémon on my bench then. I've been wondering, what are those red abilities I sometimes see on Pokémon cards?
Another great question. Let me tell you everything you need to know about abilities. Some Pokémon have an ability, and their effects vary widely from one Pokémon to another.
How much energy do I need to use an ability?
Abilities don't require any energy.
You don't need energy?
You don't need energy, and they're different from attacks, so using them doesn't end your turn.
Wow, that's super important to know.
And that's not all. Abilities are also different from attacks in that some of them can be used even when the Pokémon isn't in the active spot.
What? Really?
There are abilities that can be used either in the active spot or from the bench, abilities that activate when you take prize cards, or even abilities that work all the time just by having that Pokémon in play. The abilities text clearly says when and how its effect works, so make sure to read your Pokémon cards.
Effects that work even outside of the active spot? So many possibilities! Oh, hey, Professor! My Arcanine EX card says Terra. Is that an ability too?
Yet another good question. Terra effects are technically different from abilities.
So abilities and Terra effects are two different things. Gotcha!
Terra Pokémon have an effect that prevents all attack damage done to them while they're on the bench. It's always written near the Pokémon's name and HP, so you can't miss it.
Let's take notes on this too.
Almost there. To conclude this lesson, let me teach you about special conditions.
Special conditions. That's one thing I know about. It means things like poisoned or paralyzed, right?
That's right. There are a few special conditions to remember, so here is a little cheat sheet that I made to help. Let me quiz you to see how much you actually know.
All right, quiz away!
Which special conditions will prevent you from attacking or retreating?
Huh? There are special conditions like that?
When your Pokémon is asleep or paralyzed, it can't attack or retreat.
Wow, no way!
Next, what about special conditions preventing you from using abilities?
I think that's gotta be asleep and paralyze again.
Gotcha! You can always use abilities even if your Pokémon is affected by a special condition.
Not fair. That's a trick question.
Well, that way you will remember.
By the way, it says a Pokémon must be turned counterclockwise when it's asleep and clockwise when it's paralyzed. What if it's both at once?
Ooh, that's a clever question. In fact, asleep, paralyzed, and confused do not stack. A Pokémon can only have one of those three. If a Pokémon that was already paralyzed is hit with an effect that makes it asleep, the new status condition replaces the previous one.
Noted. Asleep, paralyzed, and confused do not stack.
By the way, there are two ways to make your Pokémon recover from any special condition. Do you know how?
I know a Pokémon recovers if it's moved to the bench, but what's the other one?
A Pokémon also recovers from all special conditions when it evolves.
Evolution, yeah!
Well, Ren, now you're almost a Pokémon card game rules expert.
Oh, that makes me want to play right now.
Good idea! Let's put all you've learned into practice with a real battle.
Okay, my new deck with stadiums and tools is ready. Let's go!
Time to set up to play. First, are there any basic Pokémon in the 7 cards you drew as your starting hand?
No, I don't see any basic Pokémon.
If you don't have any basic Pokémon, reveal your hand to your opponent. Then shuffle it all back into your deck, then draw 7 cards once again. That's called a mulligan. Keep doing this until you get a hand with a basic Pokémon. Once your opponent is done setting up and has put down their prize cards, They can draw a card for each extra mulligan that you had to take. Oh, but if neither player has a basic Pokémon, no one draws an extra card for that mulligan.
Oh man, still no basic Pokémon in sight.
You, did remember to include basic Pokémon in your deck, right?
Oh! I was so focused on adding all the new cards I just learned about, I forgot to put in basic Pokémon.
Your deck has to have at least one basic Pokémon. You're going to have a hard time starting the battle without one.